Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to learn how to connect our HTML front-end form to our database. Let's jump right into the action and I'll explain what I mean. So we have our home page for our Laravel application and it contains a registration form right here on the home page. So when someone visits this form, they fill in different values in the fields and they click this green sign up button. We would actually want to store their brand new user account in our MySQL database. So how in the world do we make that happen? Well, our first step is to make sure that we know where this form is pointing towards when it gets submitted. Let me show you what I mean. So right now, go into your Laravel source code, and I want you to go into the resources folder and then the views folder and open up the homepage.blade.php file. So for me, it's around line number 9, but we see there's the opening form tag. So this action value, this is the URL that the form is going to post to. So instead of a hashtag in these quotes, let's get rid of that and let's say /register. Now there's nothing special about this. I just made it up. You could literally set it to pizza or unicorn, but let's put it to register just so you and I are on the same page. Okay, cool. And then for method, we do want this to be uppercase post, just like this. There's also something called a GET request, but right now we do indeed want a POST request. We are sending or submitting data. Cool. So we can save this, and now if you refresh and you try to submit the form, it tries to post to /register, but you and I have not created a route yet for a POST request to /register. So now that's what we need to go do. If you just go back to your home page, let me show you how we can set this up. In our routes folder, jump into the file named web.php. Cool. You might remember this file. This is where we set up the route for the home page and /about. Let's just set up a route. So route : and it's not a GET request, it's a POST request. End that line with a semicolon. When we're calling this POST method, we're going to give it 2 arguments. So the first argument quotes, let's say /register, right? That's the URL pattern that we're watching out for, comma, and now this is where we need to give it a function or a method that should run when this route is visited. So we've seen before that you can spell out an anonymous function right here, or to stay organized, you can use a controllers method like we've done up here. Now, yes, we already have an example controller, but let's create a user controller, right? Just to stay organized, right? So we're going to perform an action that has to do with the concept of a user. We're creating a user account. So anytime you're doing something related to the user, when you log in, when you log out, so on and so forth, it would make sense to organize all of those methods into a controller called a user controller. A little bit later in the course, when we set up blog posts, we'll have a controller called the blog post controller. Anyways, to create a brand new controller, do this with me. Open up your command line. We already have our PHP artisan serve running, so let's open up a secondary command line with the plus symbol and type this in with me. PHP artisan make, after the make, no space, just : controller, a space, and then you make up a name. Let's call it the user controller. Mine broke down onto a second line, but I just chose, uppercase U and then uppercase C for controller. So if you push enter, you can then look in your app folder and then the HTTP folder, the controllers folder, and there we have a brand new file named user controller. I want you to double click and open up that new file. And in the class down here, so around line number 9, we can drop down below the commented out. You can actually delete that comment. And let's create our first function or method in this class. So we'd say public function, and now just make up a name. So there's nothing special about this name, but I'm going to name it register, parentheses, curly brackets. In the body of this function, we can drop down, and just for a quick test, let's just return a string of text that says hello from register function, and then be sure to end that line with a semicolon. But you can go ahead and save that file. Okay, and now jump back into your web.php routes file, and remember we needed a second argument. Well, now we can just point towards our user controller's register method. Before we do that though, we need to go up to the very top of this file and import or begin using our brand new user controller. The simplest way to do that is to just copy and paste this line where we're already importing a controller. Just copy it, paste it, and then just change the name, right? So instead of example controller, it would be user controller. So that works, that absolutely works. However, I want to show you a more automated way. So you can go ahead and delete that line. And I actually want to show you a Visual Studio Code extension. So if you click this icon to look at VS Code extensions, and then you can go ahead and search for something called PHP Namespace Resolver. So it should be the first result. You can see as of today it has over 800,000 installations. So you can click on that and then just go ahead and click install. Let me show you what this is going to do for us. So now if we go back to our web.php file, and notice I have not imported user controller up here yet, but if I try to use it down here, so on our register line, if I say, square brackets for an array, user controller, : class, comma, and then, the method name is register. But check this out. If you right click on user controller, there's an option to import class. So I just click on that. And then if you go back up to the very top of this file, awesome, you can see that extension automatically added this line of code for us. So in other words, you can sort of just reach for whatever tool you're interested in, and then you do still have to remember to right click on it and say, hey, I need to remember to import that, but it will automate that task for you of placing the text up here. Cool, let's go ahead and save this and test it out. So if we go to our home page, you don't even need to fill in any values, you can just hit the green sign up. And you absolutely should receive this same error message that I'm seeing. You should see 419 page expired. This is a good sign. Laravel does this for our own protection. Essentially, Laravel is protecting us from something called a CSRF attack, or a cross-site request forgery. It's a little bit too early in the course to explain how that type of attack works. Now don't worry, I've prepared a CodePen example to make it easy to understand, and we will revisit this later in the course once we've actually gotten to a point where we've seen how Laravel creates cookies for us. So we will revisit this, but for now, let me just show you the solution to getting around this. So you can go back to your homepage. In our homepage.blade.php file, after the opening form tag, so just the first line inside the opening form tag right about here, you just need to include a directive. So in a Blade template, that's the @ symbol, and then just say CSRF. Go ahead and save that. And now if you refresh your homepage and view the source, if you look down around line number 44, you'll see that there's a hidden input that Laravel created for us, and its name is _token, and then it has, obviously the value for you will be different than mine. But once Laravel sees this in the incoming request, it will actually trust or allow the incoming request. With that in place, we can now go ahead and actually click the green sign up button. Awesome, and it takes us to /register, and we see hello from register function. This is a great start, but let's talk about where we go next from here. So if you go back to the home page, imagine if you actually typed in a value in the username field, like if you actually chose a name. Right? And then you actually put in an email and a password and click submit. The question is, how do we access those user submitted values from within our register function? Well, check this out. Do this with me. Back in VS Code, go back into our usercontroller.php file, and on our register function, in these parentheses, I want you to say uppercase request. So you can see every controller in Laravel automatically with the boilerplate starter code makes that available. It uses that namespace. And then right after that request right here, just say $ lowercase request. So essentially, we're taking all of the incoming data that got submitted in that form request, and we're making it available within the body of our function down here from this variable $request. So check this out. Right above the return line now in the body of our function, let's create a variable. We could name it anything, but just so we're on the same page, why don't we name it incoming fields equals, and now here's the important part, it would be $request, and then -- to look inside an object and call a method, and we're going to call the validate method. So parentheses to call it, semicolon. Laravel's built-in validate method on a request is super useful. Now we're going to learn more about validation in the next lesson, but for this video, just to keep things quick, let's imagine that we just want to say that all of the fields are required. In other words, if you left one of the fields blank, we wouldn't want to actually finish processing this request. We would just want to send the user back to this URL where they submitted the form from originally. But if there is no problem with the form fields, if they didn't leave any of them blank, then they can actually see this hello from register function screen. So let me show you how we can do that. When we're calling the validate method, in the parentheses, we give it an array. So square brackets, you can drop down inside the square brackets, and let's say quotes username, and then this is an associative array, so equals greater than, and just set it to a string of text of required. Add a comma, and now you can literally just duplicate that line, only this time instead of the username field, it would be the email field. Duplicate it again, this would be the password field. We do not need the trailing comma for this final item. Okay, but you can go ahead and save this file. And now here's why the validate method is so great. We'll see it in action in the next lesson, and we'll learn how to actually say things like, the username must be at least 3 characters long, or, the password must be at least 12 characters long, so on and so forth. There's all sorts of different rules you can do with this validate function, but even just with this little bit of basic code, check this out. So if I submit the form while leaving the username blank, notice it doesn't actually take me to that /register endpoint. It just sends me back to the exact URL from where I submitted the form in the first place. However, if I actually fill out the form correctly and don't leave any of the fields blank, we do indeed see hello from the register function. Cool. Now again, we'll learn more about how to actually validate for specific values in the next lesson. But for now, let's go ahead and assuming that the user hasn't, left any of the fields blank, let's actually store their values in the database. Here's how you would do that. Right below this line, but still above the return line, just say uppercase user : create. We're going to call that method, and that with a semicolon. In these parentheses, just give it incoming fields. So $incoming fields. Now, uppercase user, this is a model, and we have not talked about models in this course yet. So what in the world is a model? We can talk about that in about 10 seconds from now, but first, let's be sure to import or use this file. So if you just right click on uppercase user, you can click import class. Up here, you can see VS Code's a little bit unsure of which one to use. We want this second option, the one that says app/models/user. So I'm going to click on that one. Cool. Up here, you'll know that you included the right file if you now see use app/models/user. Let's go ahead and save this file and talk about what in the world is a model. So in our previous lesson, we talked about a migration, right? A migration has to do with the database. A model also has to do with the database. So a migration is how we create tables and add columns to tables and remove columns from tables. A model, on the other hand, is how we actually perform CRUD operations on the data that lives in those tables. So a CRUD operation, CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete, right? So if we wanted to create a user or delete a user or update a user, so a model is how you perform those operations on the data that actually lives in the table. A model also is how we define our relationships. So for example, in the future, once we have blog posts, there's a relationship between a user and a blog post, right? The user is the author of the blog post, and you might want to say, hey, get me all the blog posts that belong to this user. So a model is like an abstraction layer. It represents those items in the database, and it also is where you define your relationships. If that doesn't make sense right now, that's okay. That was a super rushed example. Don't worry. That's just because a model is not really the point of this lesson. There will be several lessons in the future where we really dig into what a model is. Don't worry, by the end of this course, we will fully understand what a model is. For now, all you need to know is that, hey, a model is how you can perform, create, read, update, delete operations on an item in the database. Now, because a user account is such a common thing that almost every application needs, Laravel just already has a user model for us by default. Don't worry, in the future, we will absolutely learn how to create our own brand new models, right? We'll create a model for blog post, we'll create a model for follow, so on and so forth. But anyways, with this code in place, make sure it's saved and let's test it out. So if you go back to your home page and actually fill in values, right? So like I'll say Brad at google.com, just make up a password and then submit. And I'm so glad we ran into this error message. This is the perfect example for us to actually need to go dig in to the default user model file. Let me explain what's going on. So do this with me. In your app folder, you'll see that there's a models folder. Laravel already has a model for us called user.php. You can jump into that file, and around line number 20, we see protected fillable. Remember, we changed it from name to username. So just change this, instead of name, put it to username. Go ahead and save this, and let me explain why we need to do that. Back in usercontroller.php, so we're using the create method on the user model to create a new record in the database. If we would have spelled out each individual value here bit by bit, that would be okay. But because we tried to give it, an array with multiple values inside of it, Laravel is a bit more cautious. So it needs to know beforehand, you need to sort of pre-approve that certain fields or certain values can exist if you're just giving it a giant array of incoming data. Cool. So back in our user model, this is really just saying, these are the properties that are allowed to be in an incoming array, and we're actually going to use them and trust them. They can be mass fillable or mass assignable. Anyways, let's go ahead and save all of these files and test it out one more time. So if I go back, fill out the form, click sign up. Cool. Hello from the register function, but most importantly, right now I want you to open up MySQL Workbench. And if you look in the tables for our Laravel app and go into the users table, click this icon to query for everything in that table. There we see our first user row or user account. Now you would never ever store someone's password value in plain text like this in the database. This is not real world. You would absolutely hash the password value before storing it in the database. Don't worry, we're going to do that in the very next lesson. We're also going to learn how to truly validate our data before accepting it. The point is, though, in this lesson, we connected the dots, right? We connected our front-end form to our database. From here, we can start taking care of the details. So let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson.